Welcome to Gen Z Hoops, the Gen Z basketball, coaching, and sports business show. On this podcast, you'll learn from professional players, coaches, and executives from all over the world and see the court in a brand new way. And now, joining you courtside, your Gen Z host, John Hartofilis.
Dexter, what's going on?
Hey, what's going on, John? I'm so glad you have me here on your podcast. We've been trying to get this done for a while, so glad to be joining you, man.
Oh, don't worry. There's some shows that take months to go down. This one was easy to get scheduled. So definitely super fun having you on and going through your story, of course, and all the fun stuff you're doing now. And obviously talking all this New York hoop stuff, whatever that situation might look like. Definitely fun going into there. I'm curious, maybe if we jump right into it, where did the kind of passion for sports start for you? Was it when you were really young? Was it, yeah, I could tell there's definitely a story here.
Yeah.
Was it when you were really young? Did it take you a little while to really fall in love with the game? What did that look like for you?
That's a good question that I don't get asked that much, right? But I think for me, yeah, it was when I was young. I probably started playing basketball or in an organized sense when I was about 5 years old. And that's where it really took off. I grew up a Knicks fan, a Mets fan, a Jets fan, yeah, a tortured sports fan at a young age. And I grew up loving those sports and just playing them, specifically basketball. But John, then the love of it just came in reading about it, right? And I think I didn't know this then at the age of 5, 6, 7, but when I was young going to school, I'd always get the newspaper when that was a thing. I'll get the newspaper and read about the sports every day. That's just what I love to consume my time in doing. And that turned into playing sports video games, just, still being involved in sports, playing high school basketball. So sports has always been a part of my life. Like it's hard when I smiled when you asked that question because it's hard for me to think of a time when it wasn't actually. So I loved it at a young age, and the love has always been there, and it's never gone away.
It's beautiful, and it's awesome hearing that. I'm curious about you're talking about how the reading kind of propelled that love for you. Did you kind of always, when you were maybe in high school, did you know you were going to go into the field you're in, or did it kind of just happen afterwards? How did that all happen?
Yeah, so in high school, I would be honest with you, I did not know. In high school, I went to a school in Brooklyn called Clara Barton, which is very focused on the medical professions. And I thought I was going to do something in medicine. I actually wanted to be an athletic trainer, John. That was what I actually wanted to do at first. And so when I went to college at the University of Pittsburgh, that was my focus. But I was on my middle school newspaper and high school newspaper, and I kind of always had it in the back of my mind, but I never seriously thought about it as a career. And when I got to college, I realized I don't really love the sciences the way I thought I did. And I saw some people at my school involved in the TV station and doing some stuff around sports journalism with the Panther Sports Network. I got involved. I changed my major. My dad even said to me, hey, I thought this would be good for you. I always could see you doing this. And I just took off from there. I was focused on it. I wanted to do it. And I always just wanted to tell stories around sports. And so that was really it. It wasn't really till college that I took it seriously. And I said, hey, I could do this, and really focused on it.
It's awesome. There's no better time than now, and obviously for that point it was back then. But there's no better time than right now to chase your dreams, to do what you want to do. Maybe if you had thought, well, I've been doing this doctor thing for a year, let me just, I might as well just stick it through. You want to be where you are, and now you want to be happy. Right now, you've had all these years of doing what you want to do, and you're definitely much happier for it. I'm curious, maybe once you get out of college, what did that? So I saw obviously you've held so many different roles, especially at the beginning, right? Being a reporter, right, with the Giants, with all these different teams. What did kind of that first kind of break into the scene look like for you? Obviously, being in the city, having all these opportunities around you, all these different skill sets and titles. Maybe I'm sure there was a lot going on. What if you can kind of clear that up, like what was going on there?
Yeah, so this is always good to tell people because the journey is so different for everyone else, John, right? Or different for each individual in journalism. For me, I moved back in 2005 from Pittsburgh back to Brooklyn, and my first job was working for a small paper called the Brooklyn Skyline, and I just covered sports, local high school sports, as a writer, as a print reporter. Most of my career I've done stuff in broadcast, but it actually started out in print. And I just did that. And I built so many good relationships with schools that I still use to this day. I worked that job for 9 months, and then I was let go. I was let go from that job, and I worked as a broadcast associate for CBS News. It was like a desk job, and I hated that job. But then I got a job that I always say this when I tell people this story. This job was it wasn't the most glamorous job, but it's probably the most important job I had. And I worked as a game night editor for MLB.com. And in terms of video editing, it got my skills up, and I was really fast and good at being able to cut different highlights and do different things, and I excelled there. And then I had a job at the New York Post, which I would say was kind of my big break on camera as an on-air personality. I was a video journalist for the New York Post, and I did a lot of sports reporting for them and other general assignment news. Then I worked for the New York Giants for a while, on-air talent for them, and I've done stuff for the News 12 networks, Nets Daily, covering the Brooklyn Nets. But the real big thing that I think is important for me to mention in the story is there was a time to really get my name and face out there. I started my own production company called Backpack Broadcasting, and I started going around New York City and covering high school games. And that's kind of what got me noticed in terms of News 12 hiring me and Nets Daily, other people. So we're starting my own opportunity. You mentioned something, John. You said, now's the time for people to go after their dreams. You're right. And with the technology we have today, which was even different from back then in 2007, 2008, there's no reason you can't do it. You're doing it. There's no reason that you can't do this stuff now and create your own content. And that's what I always encourage younger people when I talk to them. It's like, hey, take your career in your own hands. If you want to do this, go out and create your own content. That's what I did. And it was so helpful to me. And I'm still doing it today. So it's a beautiful thing. I'm glad I'm able to do that.
Perfect. And it's so great that you are able to do that. I'm curious why you brought up this whole idea of maybe people being scared, not chasing those dreams, not kind of being afraid of having their own. I call the show kind of like my baby, right? The show is everything to me. And having that your own thing like that. Maybe I'm curious, maybe because it'll help definitely someone can definitely relate and think about maybe what's holding them back. Was there anything holding you back at the time of going full force? And then once you did, obviously we know how happy you were for it, but maybe what did that look like for you in saying, you know what, whatever I'm afraid of, whatever fears I have, let me put those in the garbage. Let me go full force.
I think for me, I'll speak for me personally, but I think that this is relatable to a lot of people, right? Your fear is that when I put out this content, when I put out whatever it is, how is it going to look? How is it going to be received? And so I started Backpack Broadcasting in November of 2010, right? So this is kind of at the beginning where Twitter is just starting to pop and social media is really starting to make its push. And I was thinking about how is this going to be received? I think that was the biggest hurdle to overcome, and say to yourself, hey, I'm good at what I do. I know that I can do it. Let me put this out here and continue to work on my craft. I think that's a hurdle. But then the next hurdle, John, is, all right, so when you put out the first video or you put out the first podcast and it only gets 3 views and your friend listens to it and your sister or your girlfriend or whoever, they're the only people to listen to it, sticking with it. That's the next hurdle you have to jump over. And what I try to tell people all the time is stick with it, don't give up. And I think having a good support circle around you is what allowed me to be able to jump. I actually had people, mentors, and people very close to me tell me, hey, no, this is what you need to do. You need to do your own thing. So I owe a lot of that to them because they made it easy for me to see that there were people that believed in me to take that jump and take that step and actually go put this content out and just stick to the process and work on my craft. And I think that's the thing. So it's just jump. It's easier said than done. I'm not saying it to people like it's easy, but once you do it and you really love creating this content, or you love doing your podcast, or you love talking basketball, that's all you're going to focus on. You're not going to care about how many views or what anybody else says. Just focus on what it is you love to do.
100%. The momentum will really just carry you at that point. And I mean, I can relate to that obviously from my show. I'd read a stat going into it about how 90% of shows don't get past episode 9, right? That's a huge talking point that people will talk about in terms of shows. So many shows just give up. Right? If you go on Apple Podcasts, right, you might not see those shows because you're looking at the ones with 100 episodes because those are the ones you listen to and those are the good ones. But if you were to look at all the shows that are ever made, there's so many with 4 or 5 episodes because at that point people gave up. I mean, that was around the point I was at 7, 8, 9. I'd had on a bunch of my friends. I'd maybe done some solo shows. People were making fun of the name of the show, whatever it was. And I was self-conscious about it. All of a sudden, doubling down and saying, I started this, I'm going to finish it. You're going to hit a tipping point at some point. You're going to have on that big guest. You're going to have on, you're right, that episode you're really proud of, or just hit a roll where you're like, okay, I'm going to go from once a week to twice to 3 because I know what I'm doing. You're just getting more confident, obviously, in your voice. I can relate to that, and I know you can. I'm sure some of our listeners can too. So thank you so much for sharing that, because I mean, if it inspires one person, if I get a text from someone saying, hey, I listened to your episode with Dexter, and that really made me start this new thing, I'll let you know how it goes. I will definitely text you about that, because I definitely want you to know that someone's taking that message.
Well, you mentioned something good there, John, because what you're saying, even in the work that you're doing with your podcast, you never know who you're inspiring. That's the thing that's very interesting about all this. And you never know who you're going to connect with because of who you're inspiring. So it may shock you. And that happened to me, where I didn't realize till this was probably like 5 or 6 years, maybe more, after I started Backpack Broadcasting, covering some high school basketball, in the New York City area. I wasn't doing it as much, and I was out somewhere. I was actually working for News 12, and a kid came up to me who was probably maybe he was about 12 or 13 at the time. And he said to me, I grew up watching your videos following the high school sports. And it was crazy to me at the time. And he said, I loved your videos. Like, it is, I used to think about wanting to play basketball at that level. And I just loved the way you told stories. And I was just so humbled. You never know who's watching. You never know who you're inspiring. So sometimes just keep that in mind. You're doing it for yourself, but sometimes you're inspiring others. And us having this conversation, like you said, might inspire other people to go out and do their own thing. And that's a beautiful thing.
It's a might, but if it happens, I mean, I'll be super happy about it. And we might not know for a couple of years. If someone comes up and says a few years down the line, I'll be very, very happy. But hopefully that does happen. I'm curious, right? So obviously talking about maybe that step in making you make that content, right? Once you hit that role, right? There was no looking back, right? SB Nation, News 12, all these different avenues that you were doing it in. The SB Nation thing kind of jumped out to me because like I love their content. I mean, I watch the content all the time there now. I'm curious what you're doing there with obviously the Nets. That was during a time, maybe a little bit of a darker period in Nets basketball. It was kind of right after the big trade, right before obviously the period we're in now. But maybe can you explain kind of the work you're doing there and how all the skills you did kind of came together?
Yeah, so I started working there at Nets Daily and SB Nation in 2013, I believe. So it was the first year they moved from Jersey to the Barclays Center. So it was this really exciting time in terms of the fan base in Brooklyn. I grew up in Brooklyn, so seeing that happen was just great. I was kind of around the transition before because I was doing stuff for my own production company around the Nets, building relationships before that. How I got hired, this is just full transparency with Nets Daily and SB Nation. One of my mentors told me, hey, look at the stuff SB Nation's doing. Why don't you reach out to the Nets site or the Knicks site to see if you could do some video work for them? So I reached out to both. And for full disclosure, I grew up a Knicks fan. So I was kind of hoping the Knicks site, Blue and Orange Sky, this is no shade to them, would be able to use me. But they said they couldn't at the time. They didn't have the budget, so they didn't. I reached out to the Nets Daily site. They said, yeah, we like your work. We'd like to meet up with you. So the founder of Nets Daily, Robert Windrum, who I owe a lot to in my career, he met with me and we literally met at the Starbucks, which is right below in the Oculus at the Barclays Center. We met there. We had a conversation for maybe about an hour about what we could do about content. And that was it from there. He gave me free reign to do whatever I wanted to do. I mean, I did a lot of stuff with Nets fans, with players, covering different events. That was fun because I really got to do stories where I connected with fans. And I think that was really fun on that level, and the players. And what was great about it was the freedom I had. I could do whatever, pretty much whatever I pleased. So it was just a great time to be around there. Obviously, there was some dark days following the major trade with Boston after the acquisition of Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Jason Terry. But to see that franchise sort of bounce back to where it is now, even though I don't cover them on a regular basis, and for that fan base is beautiful. But I loved my time at Nets Daily. I really got to build a lot of good relationships around the Brooklyn Nets, get cool with some of the players that were in there. So it was a fun time. But the thing I really always take from that is the connection with the fans, the reporting. That was another thing, working that gig. There were fans who knew me from the site and going around Brooklyn that I never thought. I once was in a bar watching game one of a Nets playoff game against the Raptors, and there were some people in the bar who recognized me from Nets Daily. And that was crazy to me. And I just still have to this day such a good relationship with those fans at the Barclays Center. And I actually can't wait to get back to a game at the Barclays Center so I could see some of those fans again and talk to them, because that was probably my favorite part of that job.
Oh, that's so fun. And thinking about just obviously the fans and everything like that, and how that all works out. I'm curious, right? Then obviously with News 12 and AccuWeather, maybe just staying in that sports world, AccuWeather obviously going into more of that weather role. But more so with News 12, right? Like you were saying kind of with the high school sports at the beginning, right? And getting kind of up close to the action, right? Having the fan, right? There's so much more of that maybe personal feel at that high school level that you alluded to, obviously having that at the pro level. What was it kind of like going from the pro level where you had that and you were really appreciative of it, to going to the high school level where that personal touch was just through the roof?
The good thing for me was that I had done the high school stuff before, right? Like I had it as a print reporter and I'd done it for Backpack. And in full transparency with the News 12, Pat O'Keefe, who was my sports director at News 12, he saw me doing reports for Backpack and he saw me doing reports for Nets Daily. He actually saw me doing a report for Nets Daily once and said, hey, I know you did everything. You could shoot, you could edit and report, which is what they do at News 12. And so I said, yeah, and that landed me an interview there. And I'm very grateful to him for that opportunity. But going back to high school, you're right, it's a different animal because things are just way more close and personal. You got to keep your own stats. You got to know every play that you're shooting. And so, for the highlights for the show. And a lot of it is even more so relationship building. But because of the brand of News 12, because of how they are known and looked at in the local community, whether it was in the Bronx or was in Brooklyn, there was a good relationship with fans, with coaches, with the players. They really trusted the brand and trusted you coming in there and telling the stories. And it's fun. It's one of the things I would say covering high school sports is some of the purest form of journalism that you'll do in terms of sports journalism, right? Because when he gets hired, because there's more of a business involved in it on either side, and you never get that same access to a player. I'm recently working on some stories. Again, I was telling you before we recorded, John, around high school sports. And today I called up an athletic director who I've known for years at a specific school and asked her about doing some stuff. And because of those relationships I had over the years, she's like, yeah, of course you could come and do this. And of course we could talk. So I've built some great relationships with that. And there's great stories on a high school level, as you know. And so, I just love doing it. I think there's great stories anywhere. That's what I learned as a sports storyteller, John. Whether it's the pros, whether it's college, whether it's high school, if you really love the storytelling, you'll find your passion telling those great stories, no matter where they are, what level it's on.
Well, thinking about that idea of storytelling, I mean, it really just makes it just seem so much larger than maybe just looking at it as okay, I'm covering some game that's 32 minutes long. Like right, thinking of it in that maybe the way it kind of looks in front of you, or maybe the people seeing, oh, you're watching a bunch of kids that maybe can't dunk or this or that, right? No, but there's so much more to it than that, right? There's so much more to the excitement. Than looking at it at face value as to, oh, well, maybe these kids aren't that good, or maybe they're too young, or maybe they're not very talented. There's so much to take from a high school game. That's something I've definitely learned with my team, but just in general, that's just a lesson that sports should be teaching all of us. I would hope. And then obviously I'm curious, right? So we kind of had that idea at the beginning about your baby. Like backpack's been such a big part of what you do, and it's kind of spanned throughout this entire process of all these things that you've done in the meantime. I mean, and we spoke about that personal touch a little bit. What's it kind of been like having that on the side? Maybe the podcasting things that you've been doing, right? There's so mmany different avenues, maybe because that's your thing. You can kind of take that where you want it. Where have you kind of seen that you've maybe some avenues there that you've really enjoyed taking?
Yeah, it's the biggest thing is I've been doing that. It'll be coming up on 11 years in November, and which is crazy enough already. But I think you talked about how has it been balancing it, right? It always hasn't been easy because I've always done it around other work that I'm doing, whether full-time, part-time, freelance. So it's always been tough juggling. At least early on it was. I feel like as I got further into doing stuff for my production company or media outlet, if you want to say, as it evolved, I started learning, especially as I got older, you get better at learning how to carve out your time for certain things and how you're going to make it work. So where it came to one time, I was just running to different games and covering games. It evolved into at some point streaming games live. And then now I have a podcast and I do a web series called Sideline Stories and the Sports Walk, and it evolved into creating all these different things. It's now come to the point where I think I focus on what it is that I want to do and the stories I want to tell. I'm not just chasing to go to this game and that game anymore. And that was cool at the time, but now I kind of get to work on longer projects and go more in depth and focus on my podcast. And so now it's a lot easier to balance, in my opinion. But at first, when you're trying to figure it all out, just like anything else, like you talked about it before in your podcast, you're trying to figure out, all right, how do I do this? How many days a week? How much should I put out? And there's a sweet spot to it. But I think as you get older, you learn to balance your time, balance the rest that you need and how you need to work. It's just more efficient. So now it's just seamless. And I think I actually probably enjoy it more than I did when I first was doing it. Not that I didn't enjoy it. I don't think I took the time to appreciate it as much. That's what I'm saying in that regard. But now I take the time and I appreciate it. I'm grateful to have my own platform to be able to tell the stories I want to tell in the way I want to do it. And that's the best thing. Because, when you work for somebody else, they might say, oh, we want you to go this way. Oh, we want you to cover this. And that's cool. But when you have your own platform, John, there's nothing like it. Just being able to have that, be able to say, this is the way I want to go, or these are the things I want to talk about. And it's beautiful. I'm grateful to have it. But the thing I'm most proud of is I'm grateful to have been able to have the opportunity to let other people also come in and use the platform for what it is they need to use it for.
That's awesome, and it's so telling as to both obviously the idea of storytelling, looking at things through that lens, but also a message to all our listeners. Hopefully, to if you have an idea to do something similar and to start your own thing, please do it. I hope I'm not nagging and saying to do it, but it's super super important. So I do have to say it again and make sure I say it over and over again, because to walk away, if you can walk away from this with one thing, it's, you know what, let me take action towards that thing I've been talking about for months on end, or since the start of the pandemic. Definitely take action. I'm curious, right, in thinking about that, there's so many, right, whether it's the ain't hard to tell, the sports walk, and then obviously what you're doing now with the betting show, NBA picks and props, right? That's super cool. And I saw you recently started that. That's kind of was the first piece of content that I looked at. I was like, wow, like this is pretty cool. I mean, obviously betting's become such a huge part of sports now. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and maybe what that's looked like for you and starting that new show?
So to be honest with you, man, I never would have thought 2 years ago, maybe even a year ago, that I'd be doing something about sports betting. But we've seen, I think the two things people around sports journalism have to keep their eye on is, one, sports betting, as you mentioned, and two, even the business around sports and sports tech. There's a lot of journalism opportunities in that, or they're starting to bubble. So I've been doing this show called NBA Picks and Props. It's a weekly show. I do it with my podcast co-host, Brian Fonseca, and two of my other friends who are very involved in basketball, Jamal Murphy and Gerard Hector. And we talk every week about different odds and different things around storylines around the NBA and how that affects betting. How this came about was through a guy I went to college with, Sam Coulter, who runs the Props Network. It's a YouTube channel. People should go subscribe to that. They have great content around sports betting. And he asked me if I want to do an NBA show. My mentor, Jamal K. Davis, does a show on there as well, too. So they asked me to come on and do that. Diehard NBA fan. If you're watching this podcast, you know from the shirt. And so it was just a great opportunity to do it and to get my sort of feet wet, John, in that area where I maybe hadn't been as comfortable. So now I look a lot more at the lines. I'll be honest, I'm not like a huge gambler. I've never been, but gambling is growing. It's going to be legal at some point in all 50 states. Eventually, it's going to happen. And people have a great interest in this. There's a strong interest in it around sports. It makes things interesting for people with sports. So for me, it's been fun, man. Like, it's been fun. I got to do it with 3 people who are my friends. We love talking basketball. We all have a group chat and we talking anyway. So to talk this stuff around betting has just been a thrill, man. I look forward to doing more with the Props Network and expanding my talents more into that. And I think that kind of ties into what we're talking about, John, which is never limit yourself to just one thing in sports journalism. You can do many things and wear many hats, and it's okay, but just be open-minded to new opportunities that may come along.
And it's definitely the message I'm sure we've both been harping on this entire show, because it's so important that our listeners are hearing that and that they're doing that. You obviously are a living testament to that with just, if someone would look at your LinkedIn profile and just see the body of work. But also, obviously, I mean, we've spoken about so many things. There's one thing we haven't spoken about yet, and that's the short series, right? You did for Sideline Stories about the Puerto Rican boxing story. That won a bunch of awards, right? That won a bunch of awards. I saw that you were a nominee for the Stuart Scott Award, which I thought was super cool. And I would imagine all this stuff is kind of tied into going out on a limb, right? Being an executive producer for something, right? Is that something that, how did that idea kind of come to you? Was it someone you knew? Did it what did the process look like in you kind of being behind that short being made?
So that short being made, that specific one for Sideline Stories, that was that I give a lot of credit to my co-host Brian Fonseca of the Ain't Hard to Tell podcast. He had the idea for the story. He's Puerto Rican and he wanted to do something around different Puerto Rican fighters. He's a big boxing fan leading up to the Puerto Rican Day Parade. And it was the first Puerto Rican Day Parade following Hurricane Maria. And so he had the idea to do stories. We reached out to the boxers. They gave us the access. Myself and a crew of other people who worked on it. We got to produce it. Brian did the reporting. It was so fun to work on. And I think that is, I'm not sure if it is right now, but it's one of our it's even the top 3 most viewed videos in backpack broadcasting. It's one of the works I'm really proud of in terms of editing, writing, shooting. We did a great job on it. And we've submitted it for a bunch of awards, as some other Sideline Stories have, and to win those awards, and also be nominated for some. That's been fantastic. Great when you do work on something that you're passionate about, and then you see other people respect it within the industry. That's huge. You mentioned the Stuart Scott Award, which I was nominated for this year by the New York Association of Black Journalists. That means a lot to me, even though I didn't win the award. Shout out to Taylor Rooks, who won the award. a great journalist she is for Bleacher Report. I was nominated with a good friend of mine, Kimberly Martin, who works for ESPN, and Justin Walters, who works for WPXI. All great journalists I know, but I think what means the most to me is I was the one person who was nominated for this, which my work really was looked on that I'd done as an independent outlet. And that was huge for me. So to be nominated for that, for a guy, you know, if you take it back to my college days, my influences, I have a huge respect for Stuart Scott. He's one of the reasons that I wanted to do sports journalism. He has a lot to do with that. You know, I was growing up watching him on SportsCenter before he unfortunately passed away, but it was such a huge honor to be nominated for an award in his name. And that's something I'll never forget, can never be taken away, but to do it where a lot of the content was recognized by the New York Association of Black Journalists, in which I'm a member, that was recognized that I've been doing was really great. Because in the last year, through the pandemic, I did some really good work on sideline stories, and I took advantage of the time and did that. And there's more stuff coming out with that I think people will enjoy coming out soon. So it'll be good.
No, I love it in terms of obviously the content. Obviously, you're getting recognized for it in a big way, which is great in the sense of all this stuff happening, and the awards that maybe the show was for, that you were nominated for, all that stuff is really, really cool. I'm thinking too, though, right? You're making all this content. The one thing that's kind of always been around is obviously, like you said, how you love this game. It's funny. I'm pretty sure George Murison said that when he was drafted, and when he came on the show back in October. I remember I'd asked him to say it because it's just like such a recognizable thing. I love this game, but definitely love that, and obviously the passion was always there. I'm curious, right? The passion kind of from the start was always with the Knicks, and they've been playing great this season. So I do want to ask you just a little bit about them. What are you maybe most surprised by or most happy about in seeing the season kind of transpire and them looking like they're going to lock up a playoff seed hopefully in the next few weeks?
I'm probably most surprised, John, with how quickly the team bought into the culture of Thibodeau. I believe Thibodeau could come in and change his culture. I liked him as a coach. I think he fits for New York. I think he makes a lot of Knicks fans, especially of my age, who grew up watching the 90s Knicks when they had their very rugged defensive teams. You've seen that defensive culture come in here. Now, on NBA Picks and Props, myself and some of the other guys, we did pick them to get the over of 20 wins this year. We did pick that. I thought the Knicks would do better than that. They've exceeded those expectations, and it looks like they can go to playoffs. Hopefully they can avoid the play-in. But I think I would say I'm surprised at how quickly the entire team seems to have bought in. And then number two would be Julius Randle. I'll be honest. I wanted him out of town at the end of last year. And because I thought he turned the ball over too much, thought it was too much of a black hole on offense, but how he's improved his game. And it should be a lesson to all of the sports fans. We don't have to box somebody in and say they're this or that at a certain point. Guys can develop, guys can improve with the right coaching. He has done that, and he's put in the work, and he's growing as a leader. I think him and then RJ Barrett's development as well, too, from year one to year two. I know a lot of Knicks fans wanted to write him off, but RJ's looked good, and he's progressing in the right way. So I think the biggest thing for me when I think about the Knicks team right now is they have an identity. They have a culture. There's a clear way they want to play. And if you're a Knicks fan, you should be optimistic. And the front office has shown thus far to be patient. We'll see how things go, but thus far they've shown to be patient. And I think if they continue that mindset in that culture building, it'll bode well for them going forward.
That's huge. It's so enlightening it's so much refreshing maybe to hear a Knicks fan talk about something just right so positive when it comes to their season, because I'm used to, right, in my lifetime or most of my fellow Gen Zers of that not being the case. So it's really great to think about maybe how the season projection was 20 wins. We've obviously far exceeded that up to this point already, which is great. We're not used to over delivering. So I'm gonna ride this wave for as long as I possibly can. I'm definitely enjoying the ride, going to a bunch of games and kind of just absorbing all that energy as best as possible. So it's really cool hearing you talk about that, right, as being in New York or being some of the coverage that's covered the team, or it's really been close around the whole New York sports scene. Thinking about that is really cool. And obviously, right, we've spoken about, right, the passion, all these different things that have kind of built you up and made you the journalist you are now. I'm curious, right, other than telling people to start, but I remember telling yourself at the time to start, and you did with Backpack. What's some advice you'd go to give yourself when you got out of journalism school, right? With all the experiences that you've had, right, so many different skills you've picked up. What's some advice you'd go back and tell a 20-year-old Dexter Henry?
I would tell a 20-year-old Dexter Henry, I would definitely tell him that don't wait as much when you get out and invest in yourself early. And it's the same thing I'll tell somebody now. If I had known at 20, when I was a couple years away from finishing college, I'd have told myself, invest in yourself more. I would have bought a camera earlier. I would have bought the gear I needed earlier to do what I wanted to do, because I didn't end up doing that stuff till about the time I was 25. And I could have had to jump on certain things earlier. That's why I try to tell younger people now, invest in yourself. Whatever it is you think you need. If you want a podcast, go buy yourself a good mic. Go get yourself a good webcam, because we're doing this stuff from home. Invest in the equipment to do what it is you need to do. Because now you're young. I'm kind of speaking to you too, John, on this. You've got the energy on your side. You've got health on your side. We all don't know how much time we have, but make the best use of the time. That's kind of really what I'm trying to say, which is we don't know what time we have and whatever it is that we love to do. So make as much use of it as you can. I was fortunate during college to have great opportunities to be around Pitt basketball, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Pirates, Pitt football. I had great opportunities to cover that. And I loved those years, and that taught me a lot. But if I had to go back when I got out, if I could have started backpack broadcasting 2-3 years earlier, it would have been even more fantastic for my career, because nobody was really doing in New York City what I was doing in terms of independently covering high school sports, specifically high school basketball. So yeah, I would have done it earlier, but I learned so much from that. And even the things that you miss out when you're young taught me more. So when the pandemic came about, John, it was like, all right, well, now you have to reinvest in yourself. You have to reinvest in your time. And that's something I've done more now. So you have time to do stuff, go in, use those opportunities. Don't let that time pass you by, because as I can say it for my career, I said it about you with the podcast or whatever anybody's doing, you never know who's watching. And you never know that even by you creating your own stuff, somebody might come along and say, hey, we have an opportunity here. That's what happened for me with Nets Daily. That's what happened with News 12. Because I had done the work, because I invested in myself and the time and created my own product, people were able to see I was able to do and help their companies. And it worked out in that way. And I think it'll still continue to do that with the things I create.
It's incredible. And like the things you will create and things you have created in the past. Can you, before we wrap up, if you could recap what you're doing now, because only because we've said so much, I don't want listeners to forget what it is that you're actually doing at this moment in time, or what's still going on. Where can our listeners hear more from you and find more about you?
Yeah, so you can follow me. Obviously, I'm on social media platforms at DHenryTV. You can also follow the Ain't Hard to Sell podcast at AHTT podcast. Also, I'll be working on season 4 of the Sports Walk, which is a web series where we follow around different sports fans. John, I'm gonna have to get you on there. We'll have to get you on the show. We got to make that happen. Where we follow around different sports fans, walk them around different cities, and we talk different people. I encourage people to check it out. There's 3 seasons of that. We didn't do one last year because of the pandemic, but we'll do one this year. Sideline stories, there'll be some more stuff coming out. But if you want to see all that content, follow Backpack Broadcasting YouTube channel. It's there. Website will be redone and done soon. But those are the things I'm really focusing on now. Focusing on a lot of independent stuff with Backpack. Obviously, NBA picks and props with the Props Network. Follow and subscribe to the Props Network for more content on there. If you're a basketball fan, if you are a basketball betting fan of legal age, you can definitely check that out there as well too. So those are all the places you can follow me, and hopefully more good stuff coming along the way. But those are really my focuses. A lot of Backpack stuff over the next couple of months is going to be really my focus.
Awesome. And a reminder to all our guests, there is a back button, there is a rewind button, there is a slow button if you need to listen to that again, because there is a lot of content there that Dexter's putting out there. So the Apple Podcast, Spotify, whatever, they're helping you out. They're giving you the tools to make sure that you don't miss out on stuff. And of course, we'll also have everything in the show notes. But Dexter, thanks so much for joining the show and obviously dropping all this knowledge and all this advice to both myself, obviously, because I related and took so much from it, but also our listeners who hopefully maybe will follow in your footsteps. And who knows, maybe you might have just inspired someone on the show. So thank you so much for coming on, and can't wait to talk soon, and definitely would love to just continue this and kind of see how our content can all mesh together.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate you having me on. You keep doing what you're doing because you are inspiring others, and I'm always glad to see other independent content creators and journalists doing their thing. So keep doing what you're doing, and thank you for having me. And whenever you want me back, I'll be back, man.
Thanks for listening to Gen Z Hoops. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on Instagram, LinkedIn, and all major social media platforms at Gen Z Hoops. You can tune in and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and every other podcast platform on the planet. Get ready for the next episode.